Hello developers, writers, and everyone who loves game design.
Welcome to DLC Not Included, our weekly podcast where we discuss game development, the industry, and everything in between.
We're your hosts, Steele
and Teal. Glad you can join us.
All right, so we are hitting the home stretch of Season 1.
Yes.
It is a beautiful Saturday, and we have our cups of coffee, and we're ready to talk.
We got a really good topic planned for you this time.
Okay, what are we touching?
Planning your game project.
Planning your game project.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Let's go ahead and start this with a disclaimer, though. This is not going to be about project management techniques.
That would be a lot bigger than what this podcast could handle. Besides, didn't we do that in a creator classroom?
We did, and it was actually a very long one where we went over a lot of the ins and outs of project management. Now, today we're going to be specifically talking about managing your game project itself. Before we get started, though, I want to give a shout out to anyone who's watching us or listening to us.
Yes.
Live, either over Twitch or on the simulcast on our Discord channel. We do notice that people do listen to us live.
Yes, they do.
And we also want to give a thanks to anyone who listens to us later on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, etc.
Thank you.
Yes. So let's kind of jump in on the big idea.
Okay.
What is the big idea?
Well, I just simply said the big idea because that's what I refer to when I've got this new game I want to do.
Ah, yes. Okay.
So it's the big idea.
Okay.
And there are some basic questions you should ask yourself while you're busy ruminating and noodling with your big idea.
Okay. What are those kind of questions? Let's go over them.
Okay. First of all, what type of game are you thinking about doing?
Now, you mean like a genre, like a platformer or an RPG or an FPS?
Yes. What I'm thinking specifically is it, what genre is it? Mm-hmm. And, that sort of thing.
Okay. So a little further than just its quote unquote, box marked Steam category genre.
Right.
So not just an RPG, but a fantasy JRPG,
right,
or a horror action FPS.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just described fear just now.
I think you did.
Or a multiplayer sandbox. Kind of
yes.
Okay.
So you need to think about the type of game.
Okay.
Then you, as well, you need to think about, is it going to be 2D or 3D?
Right, or that 2.5D like Octopath Traveler, where it's
yes,
a 3D background and a 3D landscape environment, but 2D sprites.
Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
Think about how your game is going to play out there.
Yeah.
And hey, more about the big idea. Key features.
Now, this is probably one of the most important parts of this.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into in a few minutes how brainstorming connects to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't have your list of key features, core features,
yes,
these are the things that make your game. If you don't have those, your game project is not going to form properly.
Not really, no.
Or you're going to just start lumping things in because they look cool and they sound cool, or there's a cool plugin on the marketplace for it or whatnot. Next thing you know, you're going to have massive feature creep.
Yeah.
And you want to avoid feature creep. It is the death of your game, especially on the dev side.
Yeah, so that's why in the very beginning, when you're thinking about your big idea, is to note those key features that you want to incorporate.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that, but let's move on this list.
Okay. Characters. Who are they?
Okay, and you're talking about everything from your protagonist, tritagonist, to primary antagonist, secondary antagonist.
Absolutely.
All the peneples walking around, all the sheeples that you have to save, that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
So are you talking about...
Well, no, I'm not talking about all those.
Okay.
I'm just talking about the main and your supporting cast.
Yeah. Okay.
That sort of thing.
The people the story focuses on the most.
Yes.
Got it. In writing, it would be your protagonist and that supporting cast, and then your primary antagonist and supporting cast.
That's right,
okay.
Yes.
So kind of approach it the same way you would approach a book?
Oh, yeah.
For this part?
Yeah, because you think about it, games and books are very similar in the writing concept.
True story.
In the writing aspect of it.
Yes, they are.
So we are noodling about your characters. Hey, think about your setting too. When and where does this story take place?
Yeah, get yourself a World Anvil or Campfire,
Yes.
a World Anvil account or a copy of Campfire, because Campfire's offline, and do yourself some massive world building. And you build that world and keep building that world.
Yeah.
Which we'll get back to that one as well when we get to the next subtopic, but okay.
Okay, and think about also your target audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is this a game for children, for little peoples?
Yeah.
Is this a game for hunting enthusiasts?
Ah, yes, like Big Game Hunter.
Yeah.
That is actually an arcade game. The guy who wrote it is somebody I know from Laser Shot. It's actually a game where you're a big game hunter hunting. So, I mean, you think about that. Mm-hmm. There's a target audience for that.
Absolutely.
They put those arcade machines into your cowboy bars.
Yes, they do.
And it was massively successful. So you got to think on that level.
Yeah.
Of target audience.
Your target audience.
So many of your design decisions are going to come from who you want to have play your game.
Yes. And one of the final things to be thinking about when you're noodling with your big idea is the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Because the default that everyone's going to say, especially the indie devs, is PC on Steam or GOG. Right. That's the default, but look beyond that. There's other platforms. What about mobile games? Yeah.
Designed for the phone or the tablet.
Yeah. If you want to have a certain target audience, this kind of ties in. Mm-hmm. A certain target audience is not going to play a PC game on Steam.
Exactly.
But they'll play a mobile game on their phone.
Mm-hmm.
So that is all stuff to consider. There's a lot of moving parts here, Teal.
A lot. And that's why this is the nebulous idea stage. Mm-hmm. You're writing this stuff down and, hey, it's brainstorming.
Oh, yes. Which let me go ahead and start tying in the topics we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, so the two things that I want to focus on the most, although we'll talk about everything, is the key features and the setting.
Yeah.
Because here's where you're going to, in the big idea phase of your project planning, this is where you're going to do so much of your heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the key features. When you start brainstorming those key features, list down everything that you absolutely want to have in your game, everything you wish. If you could have your dream game with every possible feature, regardless of how ridiculous it is, write it down during this phase when you're brainstorming your key features. Write it all down. Remember, brainstorming, there's no wrong ideas.
Exactly. Just bring it all down onto the written form, whether it's paper or computer you're typing on.
Exactly. Then what you want to do is you want to start taking from that list, a massive ass list, what you actually should have.
Yeah.
You want to look at everything. Look at all the other pieces, parts we talked about. Target audience, platform, characters, story, everything. And pull from that massive list that you just brainstormed the things you absolutely have to have. That if you don't have, the game you're trying to create cannot function.
There we go.
Those are your key features. And
and
if you've done it right, you may have a big old list of 30, 40, but you're going to come down with a final list of 5, 6. And you should. If you find that the majority of the list on your brainstorm is in your key feature list, you need to start back.
You need to start again.
Do it again. Do it again until you get it right.
Because you want to titrate all the way down to the core.
100%. Now, for setting, and we've talked about this before in many of our creator classrooms and many of our live streams, this is a point we kind of hammer. And you could also do this with character history, but let's talk specifically about setting.
Yeah.
You want to have everything in your world setting that could possibly influence the game, even if the player's never going to see it. You want that in your world building.
True.
When you're designing it, put everything down.
Yes, because then it's all in your I want to say in your head, but you as the developer, you have all that as your basis. So when you're creating your story and you're creating your scenarios, it doesn't have to come out in the game, but that framework is there, and you are building on that and it comes out. It actually comes out very organically and
players can see it. Players
Yeah.
can definitely see it. Let's give an example. So maybe you have this underlying magical source, mana. And so you have this magic, this mana. And mana flows throughout your world. And during the earliest parts of your world's formation, the mana flowed into each of the different parts of the world that existed while the world was coming together, whether it be through a protosphere or whatever. And it goes through the earth itself, the various rocks and geodes. It goes through the magma that was coming through the course. It goes through the air. It goes through
it just
the
flows
oceans,
through everything.
And in doing so, it created its own sort of flavor. I'm going to say flavor of mana. Its own sort of piece. So it's like, the stuff that goes through the magma is now a little different than the stuff that goes through the earth, the water, the air, etc. The player's never going to know that. Here's what the player knows. There are 4 types of mana: earth, air, fire, water. But you, the developer, have that extra bit of world building so that you know why it's that way. And maybe there will be a piece of lore. Maybe there won't be. But you, the developer, have to create all the stuff that is backstage, and the player's never going to see. Same thing with the characters. Like, let's say you have your villain, and something happened in the villain's past that made them this way. And, you kind of go even further back, like maybe into great detail as to those events that occurred and what it was like for the villain's parents and the villain's grandparents.
Right.
What lineage did the villain come from? That kind of thing. And the player may never know any of that. They may never learn a single bit. But you know how the villain came to be.
Exactly.
So now you can write the villain's motivation.
See?
There you go. So the brainstorming phase of the big idea is where you're going to create much more of your world, much more of your game than the player will ever touch.
So, once you have all that,
the big idea,
now we get into the fun stuff.
Yes.
Project planning. I like to call it Project Planning 101.
Right. This is the meat of our podcast, because this is where you are going to take all that stuff you got creative on, and you're going to organize it. Because we've noticed something. A lot of games that we see people talk about languish and possibly die in the big idea phase.
Yes, they do.
And one of the reasons why we chose this as our topic today is because we want to help push from the big idea phase into the project phase where you're actually creating your game.
Yes.
So let's kind of go with, now I'm going to hand this over to Teal for a moment, because she's going to talk logistically.
Right.
You don't have to tackle the logistics first. A lot of the stuff we're talking about doesn't have to be done in the order we're presenting.
No, absolutely not. In fact, what ideally you should do is, before you start jumping into your project management software, agile, waterfall, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Ask yourself some basic questions. And these questions will be floating around during your whole planning phase, helping to guide you. The very first question that I always like to tackle is the estimated development cost.
Yes. The dreaded question that many a dev have sat there with a pen and paper for hours, staring blankly, and then giving up and going play Halo.
Right. And honestly, at the very beginning, you're not going to sit there and fill out numbers.
No, you're not.
Come on. You don't have a crystal ball. You have no idea. What you do is you just simply write down. I use a spreadsheet and just write down categories.
Yeah.
And then leave the cells blank. You're going to fill those in. But, you want to have some kind of structure for your thoughts.
Right.
Some kind of structure to target your activity.
Right.
So, start just put down your initial framework for your development costs.
And I think that's part of what we're trying to get you all to understand, is that a lot of people flounder in the project management part, the project planning part.
Oh, yeah.
Because they think they have to have all those variables out of the starting gate.
No, that's impossible to do. No.
So it'd be more, you would do so much more for yourself if you had that spreadsheet for your dev costs, which would be things like art assets, music assets, coding, labor, marketing, whatever. I mean, just
all of it. Yeah.
Just put the categories down, but then leave them alone.
Yeah.
And move on, because your project, every minute that you're obsessing over a small detail of project management, your game's not getting made.
That's a good rule of thumb to remember.
And with that is, jumping into your game's development without a plan is just as disastrous.
Yes. So another basic question that to keep in mind as you're planning out your project is, do you know how to build this? Do you have the technological capability to work on this game? Do you have the know-how?
Let's conquer it.
Do you know people that have the know-how?
Let's conquer it in 2 levels. First off, the big one, software.
Yeah.
Do you know how to work with whatever engine, which, Teal, I know that's going to be your next point, because you always talk about engines.
I do.
But do you have the technical ability to work in your engine?
Yeah.
Do you know how to work in whatever level editing software your engine comes with?
If not, can you pick it up quickly? Is there a course or 2 you can take and just get you launched off? Right. Or is it going to take a lot more time?
Yeah. Is it, and again, this is not, don't do this because it's an engine you're not familiar with. In fact, we're always saying learn a new engine. Yeah. But you need to factor that into your development time. If you have to relearn an engine, including its scripting, visual scripting, coding, particle systems, whatever, if you have to relearn all of that, then don't put your timeline down as a couple of months. It's going to be a year or 2.
Exactly. Give yourself some time to learn the engine. Yeah. Like if you're jumping into Unreal.
Oh, yeah. Give yourself time.
Give yourself some time.
And then, same thing on hardware. If you're trying to make a virtual reality game or a AR game, you need to make sure you understand how to make that technology work. Don't say, I'm going to make an AR game like Pokemon Go if you have no idea how to make a game in augmented reality. Factor in that you have to learn that first. Right.
So that is, that's part of all that. And let's get into the next part, which is the game engine requirement.
Yes.
We just seg right into that one.
Seg.
Do you need to buy a brand new engine? Do you need to buy a new engine? Yeah. Do you need to front that cost?
Or a license seat for an engine that's free, if it's like that.
Do you have an older version of the engine that you need to upgrade?
Right. Some of these things are absolute costs. Others are just time. And again, going back to education, some of them are learning. If you learn how to do stuff let's talk about Unreal again. Yeah. Unreal 4.24 is different enough from its a successor, 4.26, with the introduction of Niagara, that you're going to be relearning. Yes. And the other engine we talk about a lot, RPG Maker. If you go from RPG Maker VX Ace to RPG Maker MZ, there's going to be a learning curve.
Yes, there is.
So all of that's factored into your planning.
Yeah, your planning, your initial planning. Yeah. And here's another thing, your dev team size.
Oh, yes.
Hey, do you want to go this alone, or do you want to pull people in? If so, how many people do you really want to pull in?
Exactly. And like the costs, you're just putting down a cell somewhere, or you're putting down a bullet point. Yeah. And you're guesstimating. Right. And it's okay if it's wrong. It's okay if you say my dev team needs to be 3 people, and later you find out it's 5 or 6. Right. Because you have to start somewhere. And I think that's the thing we're going to keep stressing throughout this. Find a place to start, or you never will.
This is where you start. Yes, I do. You're right, Steele. And this is what I want to emphasize right now. This is where you're starting from.
And you are not going to end where you start. We can guarantee that.
Oh, yeah. But the important thing is to put something down in writing so you have a place to start. Yeah. And talking about dev team size, contractors.
Yes. And this will tie into our podcast from several weeks ago where we talk about finding help, because it's different from your studio hiring an employee to contracting someone from a one-off. Those are 2 totally separate things. And this is where you got to be thinking about that. Yeah. If you have a small studio and you have 5 employees and none of them can accomplish one of the tasks you just thought of during the question phase, you need to think about hiring a new employee or contracting someone out for this game project.
Right. So yeah, you got to think about, who do you need? What do you need help for? That sort of thing. And then we get into money.
Funding.
Funding. Okay. So you're gonna crowdsource, maybe get some investors to invest in this.
Venture capitalists for the win.
Or maybe it's going to be self-funded from your inheritance from Uncle Joe.
Oh my gosh, that is extremely specific, honey. But you got to think of where am I going to get the money for this?
Yeah, where's the money going to come from?
And again, you don't have to be 100% on point. Keep yourself open. If you have $1,000 to start your game project, and that is, your self equity, your own equity,
right?
And you put that in there, and later on you get someone who says, "Hey, I want to invest another $1,000." I know I'm pulling really small numbers; they don't work like that, but it's for the sake of saying that's fine. People who have successful projects on a monetary level have a certain amount they know they're going to start with,
right,
and then leave the door open for additional funding.
Absolutely. So when you're thinking about your planning, you think about your sources of funding. Now,
one thing you never want to do, and this is a cautionary tale, you never want to on the onset tell yourself and everyone else that this game is going to be crowdfunded 100% out of the starting gate.
Yep.
Well, I have this great idea, here's all this stuff, and it's going to be funded for $5,000 on Kickstarter. Don't do that. I mean, you could, but you're setting yourself up for a real big disappointment. Hey, if you have $0 and you're going to rely on crowdfunding for all of it, then your starting funding is $0.
Yeah, it is.
And then whatever Kickstarter or Indiegogo gives you is lagniappe.
Yeah. Really? Yeah. Because how do you know that that you're going to get all your funds from that? How do you know it's going to be successful? You don't.
A smarter thing to do is to put down a dollar amount for a prototype, vertical slice, demo, whatever you want to call it, depending on your paradigm, and then that will be your attempt to get crowdfunding. However, you're not funding the full game at this point. You're writing down the funding for that piece that you're going to use as a marketing tool to try to get money for the larger full-scale project. That right there is going to save you a lot of heartache because you have to take it as two separate projects. You would create your project just for that prototype, and that's it. That's the project. And then when that's done, then you put it on Kickstarter, whatever.
Right.
And that you're trying to fund your next project, which is the full game.
Right.
I know I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but how many times have we seen someone say, "Here's my game, this is what I'm doing, and it's going to be on Kickstarter." And that's it. That's their plan.
Too many. And I never see the result.
I think I've heard of one or two games that have succeeded that way, but they've already had a backing of a fan base.
Right.
And assume you don't have that. All right, shall we move on?
So yeah, just to recap, we were just throwing some basic questions at you guys that you need to ask during your planning. So let's get into the meat of project planning. You basically have two areas you're going to be working on.
Okay.
Your project timeline and your project's budget.
And we want to emphasize that this is where the meat of this podcast's topic centers on.
Yeah.
All the stuff we've talked about is you getting ready to do what we're about to talk about. Again, for the basic questions that Teal just went through, you don't have to fill in all the blanks. Just be cognizant of them and guesstimate so that you can move forward intelligently. And it's okay if you're wrong. I'll stress it one more time before we move on. It's okay if your guess about budget, funding, dev size, it's okay if it's wrong.
Exactly.
Just have a starting point.
So let's get into project timeline.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we have gone through this in the past on a Creator Classroom.
Yes,
project
we have.
Management and the dev cycle. But we're going to go through it in brief here to touch on some really important points about this.
100%.
So project timelines, what is that all about? Well, one of the first things you're going to do is write down all the tasks that need to be done and break them down.
And you're going to want to, again, dev cycle, which I'll be referencing as Teal goes through this list. you want to make sure you have it relevant to the dev cycle.
Right.
So, your early alpha is going to be where you put down every task needed for the early alpha phase, which is where you plan everything and lay out exactly what you need, like, drafting your maps, drafting your story, your high points, your story beats, etc. All of that is early alpha. You want to list down all the tasks.
All those tasks.
For that. Then for alpha, which is creating a feature game with minimal or placeholder assets, you want to put down the task list for all of that. Then for beta, which is refining, and then, the late beta, which is testing, and then finally silver and gold. Well, gold, silver, and gold if you're doing silver and gold, but the gold release.
Right.
When you get the game ready for publishing. All of that, you want to take each part of the dev cycle and do exactly what Teal just said, which is break down those tasks.
Right. And figure out which order they need to be done in.
Yes.
That sort of thing.
Because of, and we've talked about this before, task dependency. Like, I can't put trees into my level until Bob the artist makes the trees.
Right. Okay, so breaking down your tasks, and then once you've done that, you're going to assign the task. Who is responsible for getting each task done?
Exactly. It's easiest to write this down if you're a solo dev, but be ready for a hell of a lot of work.
Yeah.
If you're working with a team, this is where that task dependency we just talked about really comes into play. Again, if Bob the artist has to create the 3D assets before you can do anything with them, then that is a workflow.
Yeah.
You can't do X until Bob does Y.
So you need to build in your contingency plans.
Right, as well as what the timeline's going to be. If Bob says it's going to take him 3 weeks to make all the assets for your forest level, then you need to put down on your timeline, I'm not starting the forest level until 3 weeks from now.
Right. And then you also put down your milestones.
What are milestones?
Milestones are your end, the end of a phase.
So for example, a milestone would be completion of all levels in the editor.
Right.
Another milestone would be all dialogue for the game written.
Right.
Things like that. Okay. All pathfinding done, etc. Okay.
So these are the things that you need to put down in your timeline.
Okay.
And all that ties into the dev cycle.
Yes.
And the dev cycle is really the ideal way that you should be following to get your game done from start to finish.
We had a creator classroom. It's literally called How to Make a Game.
Right.
And in that creator classroom, we go far, far, far deep into the dev cycle. Again, I'll briefly go over it. Early alpha is where you're basically doing all of your planning, all the stuff that's not in the engine itself. Alpha is the creation of the entire game with all the key features in. You're going to use a lot of placeholder graphics. Beta is the refining of all of that. That is where you add in your non-key features. All of your placeholder graphics are replaced, etc. To where a beta is roughly your completed game. And then there's the late beta, I'm using air quotes again, sometimes also called silver. There's gray areas where you're doing all the bug testing and fixing and the core testing, the halo testing. We've talked about all that.
Yeah.
And then finally, gold is that final release where you are getting that last bit of information, those last little tweaks to get it optimized for release, and you're getting ready for release.
Right, and then you launch it.
I do want to make sure people understand that there's a difference between gold and release. Gold is that final step where you're making those tiny little tweaks in your marketing. Release is when the public gets it.
Yeah.
So just make sure we understand. So know the dev cycle, master the dev cycle, and for goodness sake, if you're going to go early access, make sure you take that into account because that's where you can stab yourself in the foot.
Absolutely.
Moving on.
Okay, so I said this was a project planning is a two-pronged process.
Yes.
We went over the timeline. Now let's talk about your budget.
Oh, the budget.
That is the other big piece.
So is this where you take that spreadsheet where you had a lot of guesstimations and start putting real numbers in there?
Yes.
Okay.
This is when, because now you have your whole timeline mapped out.
So is the timeline concurrent to, this is a question, is the timeline concurrent to budget, or do you do your entire timeline then your budget?
You can do it either way.
Okay.
Preferably, you would do it concurrently, because as you get things set in the timeline before you move on, you're going to assign a cost to them.
Right.
I mean, obviously, when you're talking about, okay, I need to hire different contractors to do this, that, and the other, then you think about the money, and you put the money into your budget at that point.
And a lot of times, and bigger studios are more likely to do this than indie studios, and I'm saying that with only anecdotal evidence, but a lot of times they'll do the timeline budget for early alpha and then start early alpha, while the project managers do the same thing for alpha, etc. So it is not unheard of to start doing these two things and have the project managers a few steps ahead of the dev team. Is that preferred? No. No,
but it's doable. Actually, the best way for a solo dev to go is to initially write it down and then go back and review it before you do one lick of code.
There you go. So let's talk about the budget.
Okay, the budget. Okay, well, the biggest part of the budget is your people. Salaries, wages, contracts. That's where the bulk of your money is going to go.
The human resources. Yes. So much money is going to go there. And then the next one is where the rest of most of the money goes, and that's
marketing.
We've gone over this so many times. If you don't market your game, no one's going to play your game.
Yeah. Nobody's going to know your game exists. So, yeah. Now, also, in your budget, you're going to need to put down line items for commissioned art.
Oh, yes.
Royalties for sound and music that are used. Unless you plan on going all royalty free.
Which you
could.
Our favorite ghost hunting game, Phasmophobia, most of those assets are free assets in the Unity or bought in the Unity store. Very few of them, I think, and I'm guessing, are original because we've seen other games use them.
Exactly.
Phasmophobia does. If you're listening, we're not bashing your game. We love it.
We're huge Phasmophobia fans.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And software licenses.
Yes.
You're going to need to budget for licenses.
And you need to make sure that you understand the license of your software, especially your engine. Because some engines, like, for example, the Unreal Engine, you get no royalties until you hit a certain amount.
True.
Then you owe the money.
And then, right.
But a lot of them are either you have to pay for a seat or you get free until you make a certain amount, then you start paying them. You need to know this. That has to be factored in.
It has to be. Here's something else. You have to purchase assets.
Yes.
Or maybe even the game engine itself.
Right. Now, more game engines are free, but not every game engine is free.
Not every one. And
assets are very rarely free. If you're relying upon free assets released upon your store, like the Unreal Store or the Unity, you're going to be waiting a very long time to get the game you want. And please, developers, unless you're creating a game for fun just to stretch your abilities, don't base your game solely on waiting for the free assets.
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird, but it's a cautionary tale.
It is. Okay, here's another one you got to factor in. Maybe you're not working in your home. Maybe you are renting office space, or there's a lot of working co-op spaces, so your working area rent.
Yes.
Like IWG or iWork or stuff like that. You might be renting out a work area, so factor in that money.
What's the big office rental place here in Houston? I think it's Regis. Yeah, they do that. So you could go to Regis and say, hey, I need this office space, which is basically going to be enough for 5 people in a conference room.
Right.
And then you pay them X amount, and you got to budget that.
Yes, you do.
And also, if you're going to work from home, you got to budget that too, because it's your electricity, it's your internet. You cannot think just because you're working from the home that something's not part of your game development budget. Plus, also, trust us, tax write-offs.
Yeah.
Tax.
Home offices are awesome.
Oh my gosh. Expensing can save your butt. But moving on.
Oh, and, talk about expensing, miscellaneous travel, food, event fees. Remember, during the marketing phase, you're going to be going out and promoting your game at conventions and trade shows and things like that. Yeah. That costs money.
As your game gets ready to go gold, and as your game goes gold, you are going to be marketing. You might go to a local convention. You might go to E3. If you go to E3, please remember Studio Blue.
Yeah.
But yeah, you need all that.
Yeah.
So all of this you're doing either concurrently, which is ideal, or right after the creation of your timeline. And the two are going to work together because you're going to be tracking those, aren't you?
Absolutely. Once you get started on your development, then you will be tracking your monies.
Absolutely.
And that brings me to another aspect that you think it would be intrinsic, but a lot of people forget about it.
Okay.
It's data analysis.
So what exactly is data analysis?
Okay. It's when you take a look at your whole project plan and your budget.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to make determinations, such as looking at the expenses. Can you trim unnecessary expenses?
Right.
Can you trim the fat?
Right.
Maybe to look at your features.
Mm-hmm.
If a particular feature is going to be very costly in time or money, then you may need to make a decision about whether you really want to keep that feature. Is it necessary for the game?
Mm-hmm.
Or you might make a decision based on your analysis to cut the feature, delay it for an update like a DLC, or even if you're playing a sequel, maybe put the feature in a sequel game.
Maybe it makes more sense to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Quick sidebar, if I may. There's a feature that we want to use in our game that uses the replay concept from Unreal Engine.
Right.
And as we look into it, if we can't use that, if the technology isn't there, or it's going to be too difficult to implement, or it's going to cause, too much of a damage to potential hard drives from accessing those replays, we're going to scrap it.
Right.
And we're going to move on. So, each time you look at a feature in general, you need to ask yourself, you've already gone through everything else. So now you're looking at it, okay, this key feature, how key is it?
Exactly.
Will my game be impossible to make if I don't have that?
Yeah.
And then ask yourself the hard question and make the hard decision, because I guarantee you every developer at one point has looked at something that they really wanted to put in their game, wiped a tear, and waved goodbye.
Yeah.
It happens.
So data analysis is actually really important.
Yes.
As I said, you want to trim unnecessary expenses. You want to make sure that you have efficient use of all your resources, human capital, monetary, etc.
Right. Make sure you're using something efficiently. The worst thing you can do, especially if you're starting out, is to have an asset created you're never going to use.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why all that planning we just talked about is so important.
Yeah.
You need to 100% make sure that this asset you're going to pay X amount of dollars for is going to be used.
Yes.
Otherwise, don't have it commissioned until you're sure it's going to be used.
Exactly.
Because it's devastating to spend money that you're never going to use.
Yep. You don't want to throw money down a hole. You don't have the bandwidth for that.
And in keeping with Studio Blue, let our mistakes be your roadmap. We've made that mistake.
Yeah, we have, and it's hurt.
It hurts.
So there we go. That is the project planning 101.
So that was the big meat.
Yeah.
However, we urge you to stick around to listen to this next part. Now, this is going to be more of a refresher, right?
Yeah, this is more of a refresher because we've gone into this, the basics of the GDD in depth.
In depth. In fact, we have an entire creator classroom on it. When we start constructing Udemy courses, we're going to have an Udemy course just on this. The GDD, the Game Design Document, is your game Bible.
Yes.
It is super important, and the GDD's creation is concurrent with every single thing we just talked about.
The GDD contains everything. Let me say that again for the guys in the back. Your GDD contains everything.
Yes.
That includes the brainstorming section.
All of it.
All of it.
So we're going to go through this rather quickly, kind of just chatting a little bit about the topics, just as a refresher for you guys. Understand a GDD can have so much more than this, but this is, Teal created a fantastic list to refresh you guys on it. So let's just jump on
Okay, so one of the things it has to contain is what we call the design.
Right.
So what's the basic interactive design of your game? Right.
Basically, is your game based off of the Vive wands? Is it based off of a touch screen? That kind of thing.
What's the planned interface? How is your UI and controls going to be set up?
Right. Is your UI going to be, something that's interactive? Is it literally just, white text on a blue screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
How about the planned perspective, first person versus third person.
Yeah, which one are you doing? We're still waiting for that second person game.
Yeah.
Somebody do that one day.
That's a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
What type of interactive structure will there be?
Right.
Is there going to be chapters, middle sections, levels?
Think of it like that. Mario Brothers has levels. World 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3 ad nauseum. Games like Eternal Sonata, God, I still love that game.
Yeah.
Had chapters.
Yeah.
So how is it? Or is it just literally from point A to point B? Or is it open world?
Is it open world?
Yep.
Exactly. The genre of your game. Hey, FPS.
Right.
Or maybe it's an RPG or an adventure.
Right. But what are you making? Is it an RTS? Is it a card game?
Mm-hmm.
Like
it could be a card game, yeah. Is it single player or multiplayer?
And if it's multiplayer, is it couch co-op, local co-op, internet co-op, competitive, massive multiplayer? What is it?
Yeah, what is it? How difficult is the game?
Does it have a sliding curve? Does the game get more difficult as you get better or easier as you get worse? Is there something in the menu they can select?
Mm-hmm. And how long will it take for the average player to complete it?
You are not the average player developer. If it takes you 3 hours to finish your game, the player's probably going to take closer to 5 or 6.
Yep.
Just remember that.
That's just a rule of thumb.
Rule of thumb.
Okay, so that was design. Now let's get into story and scenario. This has got to be in the GDD.
Yes, yes, yes. All that beautiful writing you did earlier needs to be in the GDD. Copy, paste, or just insert.
So let's just go quickly through what should be under this section.
Right.
So you need a synopsis of the overall story.
Now, synopsis is, the best way I can describe it is this. If you're writing a book, 1 paragraph per chapter. That's a synopsis.
There you go.
The brief synopsis is 1 paragraph for the whole shebang.
Right.
Okay.
And what's the full story?
Now, that is everything that I just talked about, except a lot more. All of it. All the little pieces, parts that you have in there, the main scenario. Let's dissect Skyrim.
Let's dissect it, yeah.
Okay, so for Skyrim, it would be the main quest to defeat Alduin and the different main quest lines for like the Companions, the Civil War, the College of Winterhold. That would be the full story. And then they would go also into just, hey, in the town of Rorikstead, you can do this.
Right.
In the town of Falkreath, you can do this. That kind of stuff.
Right.
If it's a more linear game like Final Fantasy VII Remake, you would start with the beginning where you have the bombing mission, and you would write out everything until the battle with Sephiroth.
Exactly.
So there you go.
So also put down what sort of scenarios are in the game.
Yes.
Are there cinematics, cutscenes? Where in the story do they fit in?
Make sure you describe all of that. Don't just put insert cinema here. You know, if you're going to have, for example, FF7 Remake, the dance scene at the Honeybee Inn, make sure you describe what that is. And at that point, you would also say it's a QTE.
Yeah. You know, storyboards are your friend here.
They truly are.
So get good at storyboards.
What's next?
Okay, so another section that needs to be in your GDD, gameplay.
Gameplay.
You want to describe the gameplay.
When we say describe the gameplay, we're not just talking about player controls character and fights monsters. What does each button do? Again, I'll pull up one of our favorite games from 2020, FF7 Remake. You would describe that with one button, you would do a basic attack. And the different attacks would be different depending on your character. Then you would say another button does the command menu and how the command menu works, where it slows time down and you choose stuff based off of your gauges. All of that you're going to describe here. More is better. Don't be brief, be verbose. Be
very verbose. Describe what a player would experience in a typical playing session. You want to give a kinetic sense of the gameplay.
Kinetic sense meaning?
Your senses.
Right.
What do they see? What do they hear? What do they feel? You know, the haptic stuff. You got to put that in.
Exactly. So if you had a game like Phasmophobia, we always talk about the games we like. Then you would talk into, you know, the environmental sound, the white noise when you enter the house, as opposed to no white noise when you're outside. All of those you would put here. What's the UX? What's the user experience?
Yeah, and also you put in emotions.
Yes.
Is this supposed to trigger sadness in the player?
Right.
Or anger in the player?
Fear.
Or fear.
Yeah.
So that needs to be put down.
Absolutely.
Describe each mission or level of the game, if it applies, if the levels apply.
Right, and what you could do here also is you could seg into Now, we're not going to seg into, but you could seg into your level design documents, which are basically just highly descriptive parts of your levels that go into your GDD.
Exactly.
It's not a separate document, but it could be, and a lot of times in the industry it is, but it still goes into that GDD. You take level 1 and you blah, 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 all of it.
All of
Critical path, optional path, descriptors, environment, sound bites, cinematics, everything, and then boop, pop it right into your GDD.
Pop it right in there. Describe the preliminary maps of each level or the missions of the game.
Again, level design.
Level design.
Yep.
Describe all the characters, your secondary characters, your tertiary characters, the people hanging out at the end drinking beer, the monsters, the bosses.
Put it all down there.
All of it.
And make sure it's organized. Please make sure it's organized, because if you're not, the whole point is, if you're not the only one working on this game, someone needs to understand your vision. And
Absolutely.
if you are the only one working on this game, you're going to forget stuff.
So put it all down.
Write it down.
And one of the last but most important thing, very important thing to put in there is describe the sound design in as much detail as you can.
Yes.
The music for each part, each scene, each level, voices, sound effects.
Completely.
You know, in a forest, you're going to want to have a wind blowing through trees effect. You're going to want to hear animals.
Yeah, you can have proximity sounds. As you get closer to that waterfall, it gets louder.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
So that, it needs to all go in there under the gameplay section.
Yes.
And last but not least, the marketing. Yes, you're going to have a section in your GDD for marketing, because this is where your marketing people will develop their marketing plans based on this.
And this is where you, if you're the developer, you'll know exactly how you're going to market your game when you get to the gold phase. Because you're going to ask things like,
does your game target one core audience or multiple audiences?
Remember, you answered that question earlier. Well, now that you're creating that GDD, you need to have a plan based off the answer to that question.
Yeah. And on the same line, who's your target audience? What are their expectations of a game like this?
If you're marketing an FPS to people who have played Call of Duty, they're going to have a very different expectation than someone who's played BioShock.
Yeah. And to keep in mind, hardcore gamers versus the mass market.
Yes.
Where are you going with this?
Right.
Hey, what's the key competition for this game? Doing a little bit of a SWOT analysis there.
That SWOT analysis video Teal did, which you can see on our YouTube channel, it covers that in completion. For example, the people who made Edge of Eternity, they are literally competing with Final Fantasy.
That's right.
And that's their competition.
Yeah. So, think about that.
Yeah.
Hey, when you're analyzing your competition, see when they're launching something on the market.
Yes.
Because they're going to start promoting. So are your launch dates coinciding?
Yes. Are they? Because that has destroyed games.
Yes.
Truly wonderful games that could have been massively successful have been farked by coming out at the same time as Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So, in doing your SWOT analysis, what does this game offer the competition doesn't?
Yeah.
And that's the job of your marketing team to bring that out.
To go back to Edge of Eternity, their battle system is God tier. They offer that. I've never seen a game's battle system like that. That's a strength.
It is.
That's also an opportunity to say our battle system is amazing.
And on the flip side, what does your competition offer that your game does not?
Exactly. That's a threat, right? Yeah,
that's a threat. Yes.
I got it right.
So the SWOT analysis is really important for your marketing people. And all that goes into the marketing section of the GDD.
So make sure you check out that video, #SWOT your game.
Yes.
This has been a good refresher on the GDD.
It has been.
And hopefully between the project planning that we went in depth into and the refresher on the GDD, we're giving you guys a chance to really get into the meat of this. So,
right.
Yeah.
And hopefully what we've done is to encourage you to get to the starting point.
Yes.
To start. Because it's easy it is easier to get to when you got that momentum and you're going. That's not as difficult as it is just to start.
The hardest step you're ever going to take in game development is the first one.
Yeah.
All right, so now it's time to take questions from our live audience.
If you've been watching, remember to use that podcast question feature in the chat.
It costs you a very small amount of channel points. I think you have to watch us for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, something like that.
It's like 10 points. Yeah, it's really cheap. and ask us, and we will answer it. If we do not get any questions in a short amount of time, we will move on to the outro. But I do want to say that this one has been a long time coming. Yeah. Just as we did the GDD Creator Classroom at the end of our run, this one's near the end of Season 1. Because a lot of the stuff we've talked about in the past, marketing your game, publishing your game, that all is now possible when you have a good project plan.
Yes. And so I really wanted to emphasize this, yes. Especially targeting you solo developers.
Yes.
Because it's hard to know where to start.
It really, really is. If you don't know where you're starting, then you're going to get lost.
Yeah.
You're going to get lost. And also, structure and organization is paramount.
That's what I want to, if there's any takeaway here, it's write it down and organize it.
Yes.
Every thought in your head about this game, yes. Write it down and then organize it.
Absolutely. Okay, we have a podcast question from Burke.
Okay. Let's see. Burke says, as you noted, being a solo dev means that everything is in the critical path. Where would you classify gear upgrades in the budget concerns?
Well, I like how he put down critical path, because it is true. You have to follow it. For those of you who know, critical path is the path you have to take through a level to complete it, but this is actually the critical path of development.
Right.
So where would you classify gear upgrades in the budget concerns? I would look at what gear you have to have. So like upgrading your CPU, your GPU, getting your sound, getting a better video card,
right?
Getting a headset if you're going to create in VR. I would put that right when you're looking, really at the beginning. Let me check.
Yeah, near the beginning, I would say
the technological capacity and the game engine requirements. So
yeah,
that would be one of the first things I looked at, other than your own capacity and ability as a dev.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to create a game that requires upgraded hardware, at the same time you're looking at, do I need to learn something? Look at, do I need to upgrade my gear?
Right.
Because if you don't have the right gear to create a game, if you try to create a ray trace game using RTX hardware and you don't have RTX hardware, you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. So that all gets put into that section.
Yes.
When you're considering your engines and that sort of thing.
Very good question, Burke. Thank you so much.
Very good question.
All right, and we have another podcast question from Nate Plays.
Okay, Nate says, on the cost spreadsheet, should one annotate a time cost alongside or instead of a money cost? For example, a solo dev wouldn't pay themselves with money.
He's talking about sweat equity.
Sweat equity, yeah.
Sweat equity is your time that translates into a cost in the creation of your game. That is exactly what Nate's talking about. You definitely want to translate sweat equity.
Right, but here's the caveat about sweat equity.
Mm-hmm.
You don't factor that into the the overall cost of your project. Sweat equity is a side note.
Right.
It's basically used for your own internal analysis,
right,
of how well how efficient your project is going.
Correct.
But that's not factored into your budget because it is not hard money.
Let me qualify what I said earlier. You want to translate that into what your time is going to cost you, but it's not part of the cost of the game.
Correct.
So, for example, if you're going to put 5 hours a day into a game, that's 5 hours you can't be making money elsewhere.
Right.
So that's how you want to factor it in. What you don't want to do, and we have seen devs do this in many, many of the communities, where they'll put out a game and they say, this game cost me $12,000, and that's because they said, my time is worth X amount of dollars per hour, it took me this many hours, ergo this game cost me this much. That's BS. The game cost them $0.
Yeah.
So you can't put your sweat equity into the cost of the game.
Correct.
Very good question, Nate.
But that is a very good question because it's a blurred line.
Yes.
And it's hard for a lot of people to make that line. But again, it's the personal versus the project.
Absolutely, 100%. Okay, we have another question. This one is from KV.
KB asks, is there a recommended resource for seeing examples of what you talked about today, like GDDs and plans?
Yes, our creator classrooms on our YouTube channel go very much in depth and actually show on screen GDDs. In fact, I think I actually linked to a GDD in that creator classroom.
You did. You linked to one.
And project plans and etc. So go to the Studio Blue, plugging ourselves on our podcast. Go to the Studio Blue YouTube channel at Studio Blue Games and look for the Creator Classroom playlist and look specifically for managing your project and the last one, which is the GDD.
Right, because understandably, when you do internet searches, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of noise. And what we've done is we've taken all that plus actual classroom guidelines and titrated it down for you guys so that it is a very useful tool, a resource.
Yes.
Without you having to go out into the wilds of the internet and sift through all that.
Because I guarantee you, if you Google search for GDD, you're going to find as many bad ones as you find good ones.
Oh, you're going to find all kinds of stuff.
And it's, let us have done the work for you.
Yeah.
Very good question, KV. I hope you're able to find the resources you need.
Yeah.
All right, let's see if we have any other questions. And while we're waiting, I cannot stress enough that project management is a skill set every developer needs to learn. There are people who make entire careers out of managing other projects. You don't have to go Six Sigma. You'll get the joke if you watch if you know more about PM, but you definitely have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And out of all the methods, Teal, what would you say is the best method? And we'll talk about it very briefly. I prefer to go agile when it comes to game development. But the actual structured planning phase, I go more waterfall cascade. And we'll explain what that means in a second. Do you agree?
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I agree with that completely.
Yeah. I'm
very much of an agile person, but there are points where I do need to go to a cascade.
Yeah, totally. So for those of you who don't know, waterfall / cascade is task 1 has to be completed before task 2, task 2 before task 3. That's when you're creating sort of that timeline schema.
Yeah.
Agile is more, you have a basic timeline, but you have room to wiggle in case things happen.
Correct. And things will always happen.
And every single Scrum Master in the world who hears that is going to cringe at me briefly describing Agile like that. Okay, so we have something from Burke, but it's not a question.
Burke has a comment.
Yes.
Burke says, Six Sigma just gave me electronic design PTSD.
That is hilarious.
It can be.
Six Sigma, again, just so you guys know what we're talking about, Six Sigma is the project management philosophy of 99.999% bug-free out of the starting gate.
Exactly.
It is an absolute nightmare on every corner, but some things require it. Like, for example, certain electronic designs, nuclear engine designs, like if you're creating a nuclear reactor, you have no wiggle room for error. You need to go Six Sigma. So, yes.
Or designing plastics and polymers.
Yes.
That's also Six Sigma. I have a friend who is a Six Sigma black belt, and she works for Dow.
Yeah. These are things where if you mess up, people could die. Or millions upon millions of dollars could be lost, or both.
Right. So that's Six Sigma.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Burke. Lots of love. I don't think we got any more questions. So let's go ahead and start wrapping this up.
Okay.
This has been, for me, a long time coming. And I hope that you guys learned something.
Yeah. I hear a lot of really good ideas from you guys, various channels and sources.
Yes.
But it's really hard for folks to get started. And so a lot of these ideas never come to fruition.
They never do. And it's because while having the ideas is amazing, having a plan to implement them is what's going to make them real.
Exactly.
And remember that first step.
Yes.
That's the hardest. All right. I want to thank everyone who is listening. We want to thank all of our fans and the people who give us their time and their love and attention. You guys make Studio Blue possible. Thank you for those listening live, both on Twitch and on our Discord channel. And thank you for everyone who's listening to us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, iTunes. You guys are awesome.
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So join us next time for DLC Not Included. And remember,
anyone can give you the key, but you have to go through the door.